The information shared in this episode is not intended to serve as a substitute for mental health services and is only intended to provide education and information to you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Honeybee Podcast. I have the good fortune of sharing space with Laterria Patton. Laterria is a writer and activist who produces content about nutrition that promotes reproductive health as well as hormonal balance specifically for Black women. In this episode, Laterria will be sharing valuable information about emotional eating and how it affects our hormones as well as our actions. Laterria is active on a variety of social media platforms, which I made sure to include in the show notes. And she has an amazing blog with tons of helpful information. Be sure to check her out. Without further ado, here is Laterria. Thank you so much for joining me on the Honeybee Podcast. I have the good fortune of sharing space with Laterria Patton. She is a writer, a healer, and an activist for social change. Laterria became known to me through social media. I am a huge fan of her work. She provides thoughtful, informative content, and she is going to share with all of us valuable information about emotional eating, what emotional eating is, how our hormones as women affect our emotions, and how what we eat affects our hormones. Thank you so much for being on this episode. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful. And you might have heard me mention that I am someone who really appreciates the thoughtful content that you're sharing with the masses. So I want to share space with you so you can talk to us about, as women, what emotional eating is exactly, and then how this affects our bodies, our brains, and also just provide us some thoughtful guidance so we can be more mindful about what we are feeding our bodies. Please tell us, what is your definition or the definition of emotional eating?
A simple way to describe emotional eating is to say that you are eating in order to replace an emotion, whether you're eating when you're feeling sad or you're eating when you're excited about something or you want to celebrate a win. You use food to deal with any of your emotions.
And so I'm smiling as you're naming this. And of course, I'm going to ask you to say more. Recently, I had a success in my career. And I made a statement that I celebrated by dancing to a specific song and eating a bag of chocolate turtles, those really delicious caramel chocolate pecan things. I
Yes.
really did do that. So in that moment, it was like a lovely treat. Like, I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to run through this bag of turtles. What are the potential consequences of women eating certain salty, sweet, or fatty foods when we're happy, when we're sad, and any variation thereof?
When we as women use food to feel an emotion instead of sitting in that emotion or finding a healthy way to express that emotion, over time, our nervous system and our endocrine system, which is the system that controls your hormones, it becomes taxed and it becomes backed up, which causes a hormonal imbalance.
Say more about that. Did you say tagged?
Taxed, like it becomes overwhelmed. Your
Gotcha.
system becomes overwhelmed.
How so?
So, say your favorite thing to do when you just have a good day at work, a good week at work. You like to celebrate with a plate of wings and a large plate of wings. That's your favorite thing to eat. Well, the wings in itself is not bad, but to eat large amounts of meat in one setting can cause your body to become, congested or backed up. It can cause your colon to become backed up. And your colon is how hormones leave your body. So that is why a hormonal imbalance can occur.
That is interesting. Now, something that I kind of knew is if we are people who are like pleasure seeking people or we're feeling down in the dumps and sad, and, I've seen on the media and maybe even experienced firsthand, like I'm sad, so I'm going to eat ice cream. I'm sad, so I'm going to eat turtles. When I'm happy, I'm going to eat turtles. And when I'm happy, I'm going to eat ice cream and Snickers or whatever that thing may be. I'm mindful that like the sugary foods that it makes us feel like we're happy is adding more dopamine to the brain. And so I'm fascinated to know that we are taxing our body when we're eating lots and lots of certain things and not allowing the body to function properly to release those things that would eventually, I guess, would become toxins.
Yes, yes.
So tell us more about how our hormones affect our emotions.
So when I'm saying you, but I myself do the same thing. When we as women, we choose to use food to feel an emotion instead of sitting in that emotion and letting that emotion come and go. When you're overindulging in maybe sugar or junk food or meats, because those are three things that we mainly focus on. When you do that, your body tries to keep up. It tries to work overtime to keep up with your hormonal processes. So a lot of this is based on your estrogen and your progesterone, which are your two hormones. I consider them to be your two main emotional hormones. And so anytime you're using food to feel an emotion instead of using your actual feelings, just sitting in that emotion, your body is having to work almost like three times its limit in one day. So, for example, is like sometimes we choose sugar. Sugar is some people's main thing. And so they'll overindulge in sugar. They'll like after work, they'll lay in bed, whether it was a bad day or a good day, they overindulge in sugar. And a lot of times sugar symbolizes a lack of sweetness or a lack of kindness. And it means that either you're not being kind to yourself or maybe somebody wasn't kind to you. And instead of finding a healthy way to supplement that kindness, you're using a sweet food to feel sweetness. When you have too much sugar at one time, it causes fatty deposits in the liver. If your liver is too backed up to get rid of the fat, it cannot work on your estrogen. And your liver is responsible for working on your estrogen. When you have too much estrogen in the body, you begin to have symptoms like breast disorders, ovarian disorders, uterine disorders, thinning hair and eyebrows, mood swings, and things like PMS.
This is fascinating. Yes. So then we have this information about sugary foods, how it affects the liver, and the long term consequences of consuming too many sugary foods. What about salty foods, which I love as
Salt,
well?
salty foods aren't as bad on the emotions, believe it or not. If you have salty foods, you're not going to have a hormonal imbalance as much as you might irritate your thyroid hormones, but that's not connected to your emotions. That's a different type of hormone. Progesterone and estrogen, they are your main emotional hormones. If those two get out of balance, you're going to know that your emotions tend to swing or you tend to feel like sad or depressed. Whereas a thyroid hormone is more of a physical thing, like you might get a goiter in your neck or you might have irregular menstrual cycles, different things like that.
So then the liver is required, one of the organs that attends to the regulation of estrogen. What about progesterone?
So your main organs that are going to control your emotional hormones is going to be your liver and then your colon. They're working really close together because your liver metabolizes the hormones and then it gets rid of the hormones through your colon. So if say you're getting constipated because you're eating a whole lot of junk food, maybe a whole bunch of pizza, a whole bunch of cakes, anything like that, when you become constipated, your hormones, they're not leaving your body. They're staying inside your body and they're building up and they're building up, which causes the hormonal imbalance. You want to always be excreting hormones. You want to be getting rid of hormones every day if you can.
Say more about the ideas that you can share with us on ways to release hormones on a consistent basis.
So the three things that I recommend is you can have sugar, like you can have the turtles, the chocolate turtles. You just want to
Thank
have
you.
small amounts of the sugar.
Okay.
That's a way to prevent your hormones from becoming imbalanced. Another way is to make sure, even if you're having junk food, say you had pizza, make sure you're also having whole foods, because whole foods contain fiber. Fiber binds with estrogen to leave the body. So there's nothing wrong with having like a burger. Your favorite burger is just that you want to make sure maybe later that day you want to have maybe a smoothie or some fruit or something that has fiber so that it pushes the hormones out of your body. And the third thing I would recommend is to reduce the amount of meat that you have in a day. So I wouldn't say go completely meatless, but if you can go meatless, like only one meal with meat a day, that makes a huge difference when it comes to your hormones. And some people, I mean, lots of women have become vegans and vegetarians and seen a huge improvement in their hormones. It's not required, but it makes sense. It's because now your colon isn't congested with meat, with flesh. It's just congested with like maybe nuts or seeds or beans. And so you have more of a flow. You always want to be in flow. It's important that women always be in flow. And that means always moving hormones out of the body, putting them in, but moving them right back out.
Absolutely. I've been a vegetarian for 3 or 4 years, and I can also agree with what you just named in terms of like my body feeling better in a variety of ways. So I'm happy to hear that I am skillful in that area. And also for the folks who still want to eat meat, continue to do that. Just everything is in moderation. So if you can just have one
Yeah.
meal with meat, you can still, have that particular eating habit. It's just going to be less negatively impactful on your body. Same way with
Yes,
sugar.
yes.
You can still have turtles, but just don't run through the bag like Vina did.
Yeah, just don't run to the bag. Just have a few a day and then save the rest like for tomorrow every day. Just treat yourself every day. Just don't over treat yourself.
Absolutely. This has been really helpful, wonderful information. I have more questions though. Could you please share with me? I know that our eating habits can and does, it affects our hormones. How do our hormones affect our emotions?
So your hormones affect your emotions because your hormones are keeping you emotionally stable. So you'll hear women say that when they're having hormonal problems, they notice they're having these mood swings where they're one minute they're angry, next minute they're happy, next minute they're sad, then they're irritable. And that's just a message from your body saying that your hormones are also doing the same thing. They're fluctuating back and forth. Like, for instance, if you're doing it with food, you won't have the need to do it with your emotions. In other words, if you're full of sugar, you are going to be less kind to yourself because you're not craving sweetness from yourself. If you're full of junk food, you're not going to go out and do things that would normally excite you because you just got excited off of something you just ate. So the brain is interpreting, it doesn't know the difference. And also the same thing with meat. When you eat meat, you're less likely to go do things that bring value to others or value to yourself because you just got substance from meat. But when you're eating less meat, you actually are more inclined to want to add value to the world, add value to others. And so that's why it's important to have a balance. You don't have to eliminate these foods, but you don't want to be eating so much that you have no need to even go and create these feelings with healthier alternatives.
Can you speak more to, because I'm someone who believes in the value of paying attention on purpose, right? Like mindfulness. And when you
Yes.
say it's important for us to sit in our emotions instead of like externalizing and going out and getting sweets or eating lots of meat or what have you, in your opinion, what makes it important for us to be mindful of or to sit in our emotions? Like, what is important about that? And what do you mean by that?
It's important to sit in your emotions because even if you're temporarily suppressing that emotion with food, say you had a really bad interaction with someone at work. And so you're going to go home and you're going to eat a tub of ice cream because you want to feel kindness. You want to feel sweetness. And so you're using ice cream, the sugar and ice cream to get it done. The problem is once you're done with the ice cream or once you have to show up to work the next day, that emotion is going to surface back up. I call it flow back up, like water. Emotions, like water represents emotions. So if you suppress those emotions, they're going to come back up out once the food has digested and is done. So it's important to sit and say, I am angry at this person, or that did hurt my feelings, or I am sad about this. And know that emotion is going to come, but it's going to leave. If you sit with it long enough and you actually, I guess, analyze it and really figure out what the root of it is, then you'll start to notice that you really don't feel like going to get the tub of ice cream, or you don't feel like going to get a half of a pizza, just whatever your favorite thing of choice is. But that's why it's important to just sit with the emotion and just, I think, get the emotion over with. Feel it, deal with it, ask yourself questions, speak to your emotions, ask your emotions questions. That's what I do. And that prevents hormonal imbalances because a lot of times we approach it backwards and we'll try to stop eating junk food, so to say.
Right.
And what's happening is, but you never dealt with the emotion. So you beat yourself up. You're just like, I can't stop eating this thing. I can't stop eating this thing. I believe you should approach the emotion first, and the habit, it'll fall off. It'll fall off because you don't need it anymore.
Okay, very well stated. I'm going to be holding on to this valuable information. I'm sitting here and I'm taking notes. Can you tell me and the rest of our listeners about your journey as a natural practitioner? How did you get into this wonderful work?
I actually got interested in reproductive health and hormonal balance as I've aged. I'm 31. So as I've gotten older, I've started to notice changes with my body, and I started to notice that they were rooted in reproductive issues or hormonal imbalances. So when I went to look for information that could help me, there wasn't information for somebody like me. And when I say somebody like me, I mean an African American woman
Mhm.
who lives in like food deserts, who I don't have access to fresh food. I have to travel like 40 minutes out from my home just to get fresh food. And so I wanted to create food content that brought awareness to how food affects your reproductive health and also affects your hormones so that you could try natural alternatives. I'm not against like surgery or medication,
Mhm.
but I do believe like you should at least try to help if you have time. If it's not severe, you should try a healthy alternative first. And also, if you do have to have surgery or you are on a medication for an issue, that after the surgery, you still have to get to the root of that problem. You have to figure out why it keeps happening, or you're going to continue to have maybe a cyst pop up, or you're going to continue to have just different symptoms because you can't figure out what is actually causing it.
And so then through your research and finding that there was not a lot of content specifically for Black women or Black women who are having reproductive health issues or emotional health concerns, you began to do your own research and now you've created various platforms for yourself so you can provide this information widespread.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Now, I've heard of the phrase food desert. What does that mean?
A food desert means that it is a community where you don't have access to fresh, healthy, whole food. Normally, the stores that you can have access to that are close to you, the produce is either not fresh or is not the variety that you need in order to keep your hormones balanced. Or if it is there, it's expensive.
Hmm.
And so many minorities, especially Black women and Hispanic women, live in food deserts because there aren't like food chains or farmers markets that are local. So you have to drive almost 45 minutes to an hour, which means that you're less likely to even bother even going to get those foods.
Right. And so then for those of us who are living in food deserts, which I'm sure is not just, isolated to the city that you're in or the one that I'm in, what ideas do you have for us to be mindful of with our diet and the vitamins and nutrients that we are taking in?
Just be mindful that you're eating a variety of foods. Sometimes it can become overwhelming when you're trying to figure out what should you be eating. Am I getting enough calcium? Am I getting enough zinc? Am I getting enough magnesium? And sometimes it becomes overwhelming. So I just recommend try to eat a variety of fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts, seeds, and you can still eat meat. I just recommend you just eat a minimum of meat so that you're constantly having hormones flowing out of your body without stagnation.
That's wonderful advice. So, for the people who love to have sugar and for the people who love to consume meat with each one of their meals, what you are inviting us to do, one of the many things that you're inviting us to do is to get mindful about what our experience is in the moment, to sit in our emotions and just allow the emotion to flow towards us and float away from us without us holding on to it or pushing it away. Because I'm using some of my own like jargon here to really just kind of find out what the root of that thing is. And by us getting to the root of whatever the function of that emotion, that will decrease our urge to like, let me get a large thing of chicken wings or large steak or eat 3 candy bars. Just kind of sit with our emotions, find out what that thing is about. And then over time, there won't be such an urge or an inclination to consume so much of that thing. Just to kind of recap the 3 things to do about emotional eating: reduce our sugar intake, be mindful about eating foods that have lots of fiber or whole foods, and also reduce our meat intake.
Yes, yes. Those 3 things make a huge difference with your hormones, especially if you're having an irregular menstrual cycle. It's normally irregular because there's stagnation, and that's why your menstrual cycle is stagnated. It's like if you can create flow with your hormones, you can create flow with your ovulation, which creates a regular menstrual cycle.
That is wonderful. Very helpful information. Now, I'm mindful, as I mentioned at the top, I connected with you through social media. So, can you please tell everyone how they can learn more about you, your journey as a natural practitioner, your advocacy for social change, and all of the efforts you're making towards healing people with eating healthy, nutritious foods?
You can find me on Instagram under Laterria Patton, LaterriaPatton. And on my page, you can find a lot of facts about food. There's a link to my blog post, and there's also a link to a monthly newsletter where I break down hormones, each hormone, so there are a lot of them, into very small lessons so that over time you don't feel overwhelmed and you actually feel like you can attack whatever issue you have in your own with self-healing. Also, you can find me on Twitter at Laterria Patton _, which is, again, LaterriaPatton _. And you can find a lot of the blog content. And you can also find me on Facebook. You can look up reproductive health and food, and you'll also find a link to a lot of the content that I share about hormones and reproductive health and which foods you should focus on including into your diet.
Excellent. And all of this information will also be included in the show notes. Something that I like to ask my guests to offer is one kernel of truth or one nugget of wisdom before we end today's episode. Do you have anything else to offer aside from this wonderful content that you've shared so far?
Yes, I would recommend that every week, once a week, that you have more time alone, just one day a week. That can make a huge difference because when you spend time alone, it allows your emotions to float to the surface because there's no noise around you. There's nothing around you to distract you. When I say alone time, it could be reading a book. It could be maybe taking a Epsom salt bath. It could be doing a facial. When you're doing those things, you don't have a TV in front of you. You don't have food to run to, which you can eat food that you enjoy, just small amounts of that food. And when you do that and you spend time alone, what happens is it helps to produce progesterone. The most common hormonal imbalance is going to be estrogen. It's just more people suffer from an estrogen imbalance. And you balance progesterone and estrogen together. There's like a seesaw. You want them to be balanced. You don't want one to be higher than the other. I'm a huge advocate for setting aside one day to have time alone to really sit with yourself and really hear what your spirit has to say, what your soul has to say, and just let everything from the week that you probably didn't even know was even bothering you to just allow it to float up to the surface.
That is a nugget of wisdom that I can wholeheartedly commit to practicing every single week. Thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate your wisdom, the education that you offered, as well as your positive energy. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be there and sharing information with God.
Absolutely. My pleasure. You take good care. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Honeybee Podcast. I had such a wonderful time chatting with Laterria. She shared helpful strategies on ways to prevent emotional eating by ensuring that one maintains a balanced nutritional diet. Be sure to check out the show notes where I have included Laterria's social media handles and her blog so you can learn more about her and her advocacy for nutrition. And while you're at it, please visit my website, which is myhoneybeetherapy.com. You can read my blog posts as well as catch up on any previous podcast episodes you might have missed. Once again, I sincerely appreciate you for taking time to tune into today's episode of the Honeybee Podcast. Until next time, peace.